Who are you talking to? Oh, God. Oh, my God.
United 175, New York. We have some problems over here right now. We might have a hijack over here, two of them. Fuel is with on an airplane that's been hijacked. If things will go well, I'm going to do this. I just want you to know I absolutely love you. I want you to do good. Go have a good time. Same for my parents and everybody. And I just totally love you. And I'll see you later. Bye, babe.
What are those people going to do? Oh my God. So both towers are now.
Okay, Harry. I got an aircraft out into the White House.
Crystal City, just north of Crystal City. Just to the north of your town.
Yeah, stop all departures. Pentagon just got hit. Don't put in that. God damn, I can't protect my NCA.
United 93, that traffic for you is 1 o'clock, 12 miles eastbound 370.
Negative contact, we're looking at United 93.
United 93, Cleveland, if you hear the sound right then.
They got something in the dollar. Remaining to be on the ball board.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that I love them very much. And I'm so sorry, baby. I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
We're 56865. We have, I believe it is a Boeing 757. Can you see him up there, sir?
That's confirmed. It looks like he's rocking his wings.
Roger.
He's rocking back and forth.
We're 56865. I advise you stay away from that aircraft. Go north as fast as you can.
United 93. Have you got information on that yet?
Yeah, he's down.
He's down?
Yes.
When did he land?
He did not land.
Oh, he's down?
Yes, somewhere up northeast of Camp David.
Honestly, like, you know I love you. Look at those buildings in New York. We want to smoke and we just wanted you to know that we want people. What is
At number 2 World Trade Center, right? Maybe the students who were talking, we're not ready to die when it's getting bad.
I'm on the 89 now. I'm gonna die, aren't I? No. I'm gonna die.
Ma'am, say your prayers. We're going to think positive because you got to help each other get off the floor. Now,
I know.
These were some of the dramatic testimonies from that day. Dr. Cottrell and Leo Zagami today for this special Remembrance Day, 20 years later, 20 years in which we occupied a country like Afghanistan, only empowering even more these terrorists and never really touching the real people behind it all. Pakistani intelligence was never touched by any investigation. Strangely enough, the head of EASY, the Pakistani intelligence, was in the White House that day. George W. Bush connections with Osama bin Laden's family have never really been investigated that much. And the fact that the Taliban were already friendly with the Bushes back then should make us understand a lot. What's your take on all this? After, of course, this dramatic testimony that today we are touching in remembrance of all those victims. Thousands of people unfortunately died on that day, and more people that died also during the Afghanistan war and occupation. Please
Right.
go.
Right. For me, when I flew back, I'm going to use it as a personal experience and explain my point of view through just the lens of my eyes, right? Instead of just the news. When I flew back to Detroit on September 16th, it was not the country that I flew out of in June of that same year to go to Korea to work on this project. There was a lot of flags flying around. There was lots of security when we were bag checked 3 times at the airport. There was a lot of worry on the plane when we were flying back to the States. I was on one of the first few that flew out of Asia back to the States. So there was trepidation. I want to go back to a pre-9/11 day. As I've been covering this current crisis, I keep on saying that we need to roll back to a pre-9/11 day, because the inside job, 9/11 was an inside job. But for me, I didn't have that epiphany until after I rubbed my eyes and I, started seeing the signs that it was an inside job. When I flew back, I started just absorbing, because I saw it from outside in. My countrymen, they saw the attack inside. And when I saw it from South Korea, and I was like going, I need to be home, right? And it was kind of like an out of body kind of experience. But when I came back, it was a totally different country. And we've never went back to that pre-9/11 country that I left. I tried to absorb as much information as I could about 9/11, and of course it was through the mainstream media lens. But as I started to dive in to the discrepancies, like the thermite and the Tower 7 being pre-wired, and why was there a stand down at the Pentagon, and all these really strange things, I started to really accept the theory of 9/11 was an inside job, and that it was an erosion of our civil liberties, and it is the beginning of a canonical event that goes all the way into this crisis, the COVID crisis. It's a bookend. It starts for my generation, it starts at 9/11, and it is in a continual erosion through the Patriot Act and now the Bio-Patriot Act. It's not a coincidence. They just rolled out a speech from Biden where he's mandating companies to force vaccinate. All right. They're framing it in the sense that you have to protect your neighbor. This is the same argument that they said right after 9/11. We have to curtail your freedoms to get the bad guy, to get the terrorist. And there were too many soccer moms out there that bought into the lie, and they allowed for the Patriot Act to happen. Now, what do we have? We have another 9/11. It's a biological 9/11. We're still being attacked. I, over some time, decided to leave automotive, get re-educated, and go and actually be part of the Renaissance in New York City. I literally in 2008, my backyard was ground zero. I have pictures of the early construction of the Freedom Tower going up and some of the other towers, and the Oculus Transit Hub being welded together. I saw on a daily basis the rebuilding of ground zero. It is my mission to make sure that we go back to a pre-9/11 day. And so this, my heart goes out to all those ones that lost loved ones during 9/11. So when I say it was an inside job, I'm not trying to take away the hurt that your family had to go through. But let's be clear. Our government let the terrorists in. The government let the terrorists hit the buildings, and the government had means to bring down those pre-wired buildings. And there's too many connections with the Bushes and the allowance of letting the Saudis fly out, you know, on planes where everything was grounded. You know what? We need to look in the mirror and say, we have nefarious figures in our government during 9/11 and through COVID. We haven't learned from 9/11, and we need to shine that light and prosecute everyone that was involved. So that's how I see 9/11. I see 9/11 as a New Yorker, but I was a New Yorker post the 9/11 incident, but I was part of the Renaissance and, you know, the rebuilding of New York. And so it hits home, especially because I actually saw the cleanup. So that's my take on 9/11.
My experience with the Twin Towers was brief but very intense. My grandmother at the time was a New Yorker. It was 1982. I went to visit the Twin Towers. You took this elevator. You went right to the last floor, and then you could have a good look over New York. I don't know if you ever did it, but it gave me months and months of nightmares. I just, the moment I went back home, I was still thinking about this place where you could see New York under you. But then during these nightmares, the creepy thing was that I was seeing people throwing themselves from the building. And that really haunted me for years, not even months, for years. I just kept on dreaming. And I remember dreaming very clearly being on the roof that was right on top of it. And I really felt this feeling for years after I went back to Italy, of course, because I was living in Italy. My grandmother was living in Manhattan. And I simply had some kind of feeling, a bad feeling about this place. Then on the 11th of September of 2001, I was in London. I was actually in a famous recording studio in Camden Town, doing the mastering of a vinyl record, so the cutting that happens in a specific studio that you go for the mastering. So we were there, me and Bjørn Torsk, a famous Norwegian record producer who was basically doing the vinyl for his recording. And suddenly on the screen, we see the first plane hitting the Twin Tower. And the feeling was very odd. Then we went back home that day, and initially I remember they thought, they were saying, oh, maybe it's a small tourist plane that hit the tower. There was a lot of disinformation. Then, of course, when both the planes hit, the second plane hit the tower, but the other tower went down and the whole thing unfolded. And then, of course, the oddity of Building 7 that went down without any plane hitting it. Then something really struck. It was like a period in which we were, I personally was involved with Freemason. I was involved with certain secret societies. So I was actually on the other side almost. And I had been involved with the Monte Carlo Lodge since 1999. I had been involved with people like George Ugo Ballesteri, who was the head of the Rotary Club International Division in New York. So I started to feel some odd connections were going on, and something strange was definitely going on. What is it with the Jewish community. There was this almost this legend, urban legend that went around about the Jewish community not showing up that day in the Twin Towers. You, of course, everybody knows you are from the Jewish community. So what can you tell us about that audit?
Yeah, there was a story about, individuals that were either working in the tower, they didn't show up. There's a rumor that they were told by the Israeli government. There was an Orthodox community, I believe it was actually in New Jersey. There was quite a few people that were supposed to be down there, but it wasn't down there. Now you got to remember that at that time, trading had to be primarily on site. We now can do remote trading, but back then, you still went into work and you opened up your Bloomberg terminal and you started trading, right? And so a lot of these traders had to be down on site.
Regarding trading, there were some inside the trading you think happening, because I remember these Norwegian guys I used to know, and I think one of them got in trouble with some kind of insider trading. I also had the sense of something wrong when on the 11th of August I was in this meeting of the OTO outside of Oslo in the middle of nowhere in the Norwegian countryside, and this guy said, well, there is a guy who is like the new Saladin. He's about to do something really strong. He's Osama bin Laden. And that was on the 11th of August, so exactly 1 month prior to that. And then there was another important event. There was some kind of G9, G7, I don't remember, meeting that happened in Genova, in Italy. And there was also some events that happened. There was these black blocs that were almost like the antifas of today. There was a lot of opposition going on to George W. Bush, who was also perceived as having stolen the elections. Suddenly, all that went out of the window. George W. Bush in front of the children reading the book upside down, and then
George Bush's brother had a contract for security in the World Trade Center for the Twin Towers. His contract ended 9/10. You believe that? I mean, so it's like, well, wait a minute here. And not that there was this famous.
I remember in early summer 2001, I said to my father, be careful, because my father was working in a lot of investments. He was doing trader, and he was even helping Deutsche Bank at some point. He was doing that instead of doing his medical job. He went into trading, and he was like, he went into his room and he had 10 screens open, Bloomberg, salary, whatever. And I said, be careful, because these Norwegian dudes are telling me you should be very careful about what's happening next. And unfortunately, my father lost nearly $500,000.
Yeah.
And amongst that money, there was also my money. So I lost everything. Basically, a few months later, he didn't really tell me that immediately. He told me that in Christmas of 2001, and I exploded in anger, saying, you should have probably listened to my friends.
Right. Well, there was this trader. I don't think they have actually found the trader, but he was an option trader. And they put in huge put calls on airlines, and made like $10 million that day in the actual event of 9/11. It was never brought into the account. So, it was just left and then expired, the options. So there was some signals there. I think there were signals in the intelligence community, like the CIA, MI6, and all that, that had the chatter that was able to produce some of these tertiary rumors, secondary and tertiary rumors within the trading community that say something bad is going to happen, but it wasn't really specific. So it wasn't as actionable, but there was enough chatter. So I think that's part of the reason why some people were able to capitalize or at least reduce the risk financially to them or personally just through just not showing up that day. So there, I was that typical guy, believe the mainstream media. When I came back from 9/11, I just want to make a quick point here. Just a quick point.
No, yeah, but I want to say, remind to our listeners and to our viewers that you have not only you're a medical student, but you're also an economist, somebody who has actually a degree and who was heavily involved, so that people understand a little bit better.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I have a PhD in finance, and I did algorithmic trading and managed a large portfolio for Catholic Charities. So, I was kind of like the average stupid guy, in the United States, listening to CNN, and from their eyes, right? From their perspective. But then once I started asking questions, and I got to give credit where credit is due, Alex Jones and Luke from We Are Change were the two guys that opened my eyes to 9/11 was an inside job. They got it right from day one, and they were able to articulate it and break down that mainstream narrative. And that was kind of my I'm awake moment. Everyone has that awake moment, right? That was my awake moment. It was like a few months after 9/11 and listening to Alex Jones and listening to Luke from We Are Change. And it was like, okay, now I understand what's going on. And if it wasn't for them, I probably wouldn't have had, quote, the intellectual DNA to understand early on what was going on with COVID, because it's a very similar dynamic.
Well, we started to lose our freedoms on 9/11, and we further lost the remaining freedoms with this pandemic. That's for sure. Going back into that September 11th speculation that the terrorists or their associates had traded in the option market on advanced knowledge of the impending attacks. In the end, I think that nothing was really proven, because if it was proven, it would have created a lot of embarrassment also for the intelligence community, the FBI, and all those idiots who didn't really warn us about what was about to happen.
And the thing is that there's the arc of history to understand why 9/11 happened. Okay,
I want to remind people that there was definitely an unusual high level of put buying.
Yep. That's exactly what I was saying. Is that there was you can look at averages of put buying throughout the. Basically, a put is that if you buy it, you can sell and buy puts. So, but let's make it simple. If you buy a put, you're basically shorting the market. If you buy a call, you're longing the market. Okay, so you can not put up a lot of money, but you can make a lot if the market goes down, with buying these puts. All right. So there's different strategies to make, do these option tradings, but that's the simple in the nutshell thing. So there was a lot of activity that was not normal for us for a September, nor activity that was very, abnormal throughout a normal year. So there was definitely something going on. All right. And that there were individuals that had some piece of the chatter. I don't think anyone knew exactly what was happening, except a very few people. But there was chatter, and that there was a secondary and a tertiary echo of that chatter, and then people could, make positions and benefit from it, or just not go down to, not be in New York that day. I find it odd that Giuliani wasn't down there when he was supposed to be in Tower 7. So there's a lot of suspicious things that were happening. So I agree with you that there was definitely some abnormal activity.
The abnormal activity, and then also the fact that after all these years, we still see the involvement of the Pakistani military intelligence with the Taliban, helping them to take over Panjshir and all that, and nobody says anything about Pakistan. Why? Because it's a nuclear power. Are we afraid of Pakistan? Is it like we need to bow down to Satan? Pakistan has a lot to say. I mean, still, the fact that the head of ISIS was in the White House that day was never really clear. He never really went to the White House and warned, listen, there is an impending attack. Please warn everybody that something is about to happen. No, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
He was...
Well, I think what was going on with Mossad and U.S. intelligence,
yeah,
they were having, I'm willing to bet the Israelis were picking up on some of the inside activity that was going on in the U.S. military, but they didn't realize it was U.S. military they didn't realize it was U.S. that was orchestrating it. This is my gut feeling. I don't have proof of this.
Like I said, there wasn't only the U.S., there was the involvement of Pakistani military intelligence that has been protecting up until the last day Osama bin Laden. I mean,
right.
10 years ago, Osama bin Laden wasn't arrested or killed in Pakistan because he was killed immediately, so he wasn't even.
No, but my point is I think the Israelis were picking up the chatter.
He was killed in Pakistan. He was protected in Pakistan. He was basically protected, as well as all these terrorists that are now harming U.S. interests, that are basically protected constantly by Afghanistan, and at the same time. By Pakistan. And at the same time, today that Afghanistan is installing the new government, we can't also forget the fact that they have already openly said that we are sponsored by China. China involvement with Pakistan was there already in 2001. Why did we not go after them back then? Instead of George W. Bush going in China with his Masonic symbols on the strange Chinese dress and being all friendly with China. And by the way, yesterday, as we know, Joe Biden did a phone call to Xi Jinping after 7 months. Why yesterday?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
So,
it's too coincidental. I see the point I was making is I think that there were intelligence agencies that are happening in other quote in other allied countries. They were picking up the chatter, and I think they were trying to convey that chatter to the U.S. government, and they didn't pay attention to the chatter. I think part of the reason why they weren't paying attention to the chatter was because there was an inside operation that was actually going on. Now, why was that inside operation going on? Well, let's go back. It goes back to Vietnam. Vietnam was a disaster because they could not stay there, and that the people, the U.S. citizens, wanted to get out, and it was a military disaster. We weren't winning the war, all right, but there was enough money that was made with Bell helicopters and Lockheed Martin and all them. To warrant the activity in South Vietnam. Well, they needed another Vietnam. Well, the perfect place to really control the petrodollar and that whole oil play is to control the Middle East. So it was the Vietnam that they couldn't get, and this was the reason why they had this. This is what General Clark said. They wanted to go into Iraq. They wanted to go into Syria. They wanted to go into Lebanon. They wanted to go into Afghanistan and Iran and Yemen. So this was a multi-country plan, and there was no plan to get out. It wasn't about hit, destroy, and leave. It was about create havoc and warrant never-ending war in that area, because that makes you more money. So this inside job, part of it is to scare the public to erode your freedoms through this terrorist attack. But another part of this was the ungodly amounts of money, trillions of dollars, that could be made in the military industrial complex for having the Vietnam that they wanted but couldn't have in the 60s. They had it in the 20-year war in Afghanistan.
How
So
many
there's
billions of weapons we left in Afghanistan? How many billions have been spent by the US taxpayer for basically
Afghanistan, right?
Afghanistan's
Right.
Taliban army?
Well, the Afghanistan war for us was over $1 trillion. But if you talk about the actual 20 years of military excursion by the United States, we're talking about over $4 to $5 trillion. Okay, now that's a lot of money for the military industrial complex.
Of course.
You know, so
also, the fact that we just left them the weapons is just a sign that the money has been made. The military industrial complex has sold their material. Who cares? The terrorists get a bunch of whatever.
it's very similar. It's a very similar mentality. It's in New York. In New York, the mentality is this: you got the financiers, the bankers that will merge a company together. Logically, that merger of the two companies should never take place. Some people get laid off. There's a bunch of investors that make a ton of money, all right, with the merger, and then all of a sudden, the lawyers make the money by the actual merging, you know, and making sure everything's legal. And then on the back end, the company fails because of the merger, and they have to split it up. So they have to go to the bankers to split the company up. So the bankers make money again, and then the lawyers make money again because of the split up. This is the same thing going on with the Pentagon. They go in, just like a merger, you know, they go in and then they'll make their money on the way out too, when they create the havoc. The weapons are there to create some sort of chaotic situation in Afghanistan. Maybe it's through ISIS-K and the Taliban, or maybe some other faction starts to emerge. But there's going to be enough material there to be able to create the chaos. And then all of a sudden it'll be, well, we need to fund a certain group within there. So it's going to be through proxy now, and we'll sell the weapons there. So this is going to be an arms deal with some group that we align with. Maybe we will align with the Taliban to fight ISIS. Because I think what's going on here is that the Biden administration is trying to get back into Syria.
But that will be what the version of the events they want to sell to the people. We are here to talk the truth. We know that Pakistan, the actual head of the Pakistan military intelligence was in Afghanistan the other day. There were actually people all over Pakistan demonstrating against the interference of Pakistan in their affairs. And I'm not talking about a little interference here. So Pakistan, China, they take over Afghanistan, and then what? They create another proxy war with ISIS-K, which is, by the way, protected by Pakistani military intelligence. Al-Qaeda the same. It's just really, I mean, ridiculous.
CIA is still operating in Afghanistan. Leo, CIA is still operating there.
Well,
who they're aligning to, I don't know. I have a feeling they're aligning to the Taliban.
Well, they are aligning. The CIA that is left over there is basically deep state assets that work with China, just like Joe Biden works with China. I mean, let's listen for a moment now, as we are here, to the words of our local dictator, President Joe Biden, about mandates regarding, of course, the present situation of this pandemic.
Tonight, I'm asking each of you to reach out to your unvaccinated patients over the next 2 weeks and make a personal appeal to them to get the shot. America needs your personal involvement in this critical effort. My message to unvaccinated Americans is this: what more is there to wait for? What more do you need to see? We've made vaccinations free, safe, and convenient. The vaccine is FDA approval. Over 100 million Americans have gotten at least one shot. We've been patient, but our patience is wearing thin, and your refusal has cost all of us. So please do the right thing.
Our patience is wearing thin. What's that all about? I mean, here we are in front of somebody who obviously disregards democracy, doesn't care about democracy. He seems to be really entangled with this new world order, and he admits basically that he doesn't care about our freedom in any way. I mean, listen to this other extract just to follow up on what he's been saying, which of course has shocked many people in America who thought they were still living in a free country.
I think Glenn Beck just, it was either last night or the night before, stated it the best. The president's job isn't to protect us. The president's job is to protect the Constitution and the erosion of to make sure we don't have our civil liberties eroded. That's his job. And this goes back to the whole soccer mom thing during 9/11. They get scared. They want to protect Susie and Johnny, and therefore they're willing to give up their civil liberties. So the NSA and the CIA and the FBI can surveil, under the, under the umbrella of we're looking for the terrorists. Well, fast forward, you end up having FISA courts and a legal surveillance of a presidential candidate and a president, aka Trump, and you have surveilling individuals like Snowden and American citizens that happen to be Republican that are being surveilled, like Tucker. So we have an out of control CIA, FBI, NSA, out of control Pentagon, for sure, because of 9/11. And it's been scope creep ever since.
We could say, Paul, that this whole 9/11 in a way produced what we now call the deep state.
The deep state was around even before that. I think,
of course, the New World Order and the secret societies behind the skull and bones, George W. Bush, John Kerry, in the same lodge of Yale University.
Well, I have a question for you, because you're an expert in this field here. So when George Bush in let's say it was 1992 or 91, somewhere in there, when he had that famous phrase, the New World Order, when he was 1991.
It was actually
91. Okay.
10 years to the date, I think, before 9/11.
Yeah. So that's another thing that's really strange. And then also they were supposed to be looking for some lost $1 trillion in the Pentagon the day before with Rumsfeld. And then, 9/11 happens and everyone forgot about the lost $1 trillion. But, but there's a lot of weird things going on. But the question I have is that when George Bush said the New World Order, do you think that is a supra government above the United States? Or do you think he meant a continuation of the hegemonic power of the United States?
No, I think that the hegemonic power of the United States went out of the window in the early 70s with Nixon and Kissinger, when they let China into the game and decided to use China to construct the New World Order. And that was, those kind of decisions were made, unfortunately, in the Bohemian Grove. And in fact, it's very indicative also that Alex Jones, prior he was also involved, as you know, in entering and exposing the Bohemian Grove. And that also was something of, I don't know if we can say a setback, but definitely it was an event that exposed for the first time that these powerful people, especially conservatives, but not only, were meeting in this place. The Bohemian Grove is a place where Nancy Pelosi's husband also is very popular and goes there regularly. So the thing is that when in the year 2000, Alex Jones entered and managed to even film the cremation of Kerr, I think that was also a very important moment. And 2001 and the events, of course, of 9/11 covered up a little bit of what was happening, because it was the early days of the internet, if you remember. And of course, you know, we suddenly saw this video, and even myself, I was part of certain groups and lodges, and I actually started to wonder, and that's why in 2003, 2004, I started shifting from my involvement in the New World Order. And I actually, I remember in 2006, in June 2006, I broke completely with these people when I stated we want to know more about what goes on in both the Skull and Bones and the Bohemian Grove, because the decisions that have been taken in there. And then suddenly I remember George Hugo Ballesteri said, but the FBI will never let me do that. And I said, who cares about the FBI? We are supposed to be secret societies, and this is supposed to be above the states. And now you're saying that the FBI wants to protect what goes on. So I think you're simply protecting the interests of those people. No, in fact, of course, then after a few months later, I broke from all this world. I started to expose all this, and unfortunately, then the backlash was they accused me of espionage. I was persecuted in Norway, arrested, and many other things. I mean, with the accusation of espionage, which is a very heavy accusation. So I think that in this context, we should include what happened the year prior to 9/11 with Alex Jones finally managed to expose the Bohemian Grove, which is, of course, the yearly encampment of the Bohemian Club. And then also the fact that, of course, there was also that other guy who wrote Behold of the Pale Horse, William Cooper, no? Who also was...
Is that the one that died from cancer?
No, he didn't. William Cooper didn't really die of cancer. He got killed in a very suspicious event that happened around his death. I mean, they say he had some kind of argument. They had to intervene, but he was actually somebody who had been talking about the possibility of a 9/11. And strangely enough, he was killed on the 5th of November, 2001. So today, in this tribute that we are paying here to 9/11, we also want to remember Milton William Cooper, because they just call him an American conspiracy theorist and a broadcaster. But I think that what he was doing was actually dangerous for these people, because he was the first who, even before the 9/11, was hinting on what they were doing, and also described the HIV/AIDS as a man-made disease used to target blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals, which is something also that these days should be still clarified. Maybe you can give us also your opinion on that.
Well, I mean, I definitely think that the U.S. government is tinkering around with biologics, and even back in the 80s and 70s, they had some means to tinker around. Nowhere near what they can do now. I mean, the biotechnology now is so much more advanced and specific and so much quicker than back then. So it was somewhat rudimentary on what they were doing in terms of manipulating HIV. But I think HIV was manipulated and enhanced. So when we say created, you know, there's a spectrum of creation, right? From, you know, nothing into something, you know, or, you know, some sort of manipulation. I think they manipulated what was existing because of the technology that they had.
I think we should create here a time. My timeline, if I had to make a timeline, an hypothetical timeline, it will start with, of course, the Bohemian Grove, Nixon, Ronald Reagan, who was not yet president, but then became president. Then you had, of course, George Bush, father, who then was sent to China by Kissinger. For a period of time, Barbara Bush and George Bush were living in China, in Beijing. And as soon as he came back from China, he became the head of the CIA. And then gradually, all the way to, after Ronald Reagan, becoming the president and announcing what you said, the New World Order in 2001, that of course will come into fruition with his son and 9/11. So I think that this is a clear timeline that we are following today, 11th of September of the year of the Lord 2021. I want to remind all our listeners that this is Leo Zagami. Together with me, we have Dr. Paul Cottrell, and that every week we do a rundown of all our weekly news. But of course, today we are focusing on this event that has changed forever Western society, and not for the better, just as this pandemic. So where we're heading for is partly described by this woman, which I'm going to make you listen, Rebecca Wieland from Australia, one of the people that is making Australia so famous for being the ultimate Orwellian state. And what she says this time goes beyond, I mean, it's like she's talking clearly about New World Order and contact tracing. Let's listen to it for all our viewers and listeners, of course.
Exposure sites are put back in place, especially with reopening and people going back to pubs and stuff, because our exposure sites still, will they be put back in place to be listed once we are reopening, because they're not at the moment.
We will be looking at what contact tracing looks like in the New World Order. And yes, it will be pubs and clubs and other things if we have a positive case there. Our response may be different if we know that people are fully vaccinated. So we're working through a number of those issues, but we will have to reflect and learn.
So contact tracing in the New World Order, Dr. Paul Cottrell, I mean, we went from fighting the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, now to fighting the Americans or the Australians or the New Zealanders or anybody in the Western world who doesn't get vaccinated. Paradoxically, today, Saturday, 11th of September 2021, of course, not if you are a woman, but if you are a man, you are more free in Afghanistan than you are here in the United States. I'm sorry to say that, but I mean, if aside from the women, of course,
and you get a free Ford pickup truck.
You get machine guns, anything you like, courtesy of Joe Biden, and there's nobody telling you that you can't have guns in Afghanistan. I mean, you see children 10 years old with their AK-47 next to them. I mean, it's like, of course, they are a warrior nation. They have always been, like Trump said, they have always been there like this for 1,000 years. So why we are losing the last remaining freedoms? Is it because finally the New World Order is announcing itself?
It's the same reason. It's the same reason why the Patriot Act came right after 9/11. It was through fear and intimidation.
Which is all part of the New World Order, which we go back to that announcement that George Herbert Bush did in 2001, and that of course we all took, and then we go back also to the announcement that was made by Ronald Reagan once when he said, if we had an enemy, an alien, this will unite all the population of the earth from one goal to fight the alien enemy. And in that case, of course, the alien enemy manifested as these terrorists. There's been a lot said about these terrorists. They were trained, of course, here in the United States of America, courtesy of all the people who watch the other way.
I mean, one of the signals of that there was a bad thing that was going to happen on 9/11, when you had a bunch of Muslims in the United States training to fly planes, but didn't want to learn how to land them. That alone, to save money. They just said, we don't want to learn how to land. We want to learn how to fly it. Take off and fly. Well, wait a minute here. Wait a minute. That's not a normal thing. You need to land the plane.
Here on one of my chats, doctor of what? So you can maybe explain for the people who don't know you, Paul, because of course at times it creates confusion, the fact that you have a doctorate in economics and now you are a student in medicine.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I used to be an automotive engineer and ended up getting an MBA also in finance, got a PhD in finance, traded in New York, managed a portfolio, decided to go into medicine, did my pre-med curriculum at Fordham University, which is university in New York, finishing up my master's thesis at Harvard University, dealing with autoimmune disorders that produce GBS, Guillain-Barré syndrome. And I'm a second-year medical student. So, with that said, I have a unique perspective to look at the pillars of the crisis that we're currently in: the economic pillar, the geopolitical pillar, and the medical pillar.
They are the two pillars that really stand a little bit like the Twin Towers. It was very symbolic. The Twin Towers went down because, as you know, in Freemasonry, you have Joachim and Boaz, that symbolize the two columns of the Temple of Solomon. And of course, when you go beyond the third degree into the right so-called of perception, you are meant to say that those columns come down behind you. So it's kind of a little bit symbolic to also have that. We also saw in those moments of concentrated moments, the image of a demon surfacing from a photo of one of the Twin Towers. We can still all remember that moment.
Well, not just that. In Chambers Street, the subway, for a long time, they had these eyes in mosaics that were on the floor and on the wall, in the subway system. Mm-hmm. Now Chambers Street gets you right to ground zero, right? Yeah. So, and then they build the Oculus for the transit hub down there, which is one big eye when you look at it from Skyview, right? So there's like this, and then the obelisk of the Freedom Tower. There's a lot of symbolism that's going on down there. Now, I happen to there is a Michigan connection to New York, all right? The original architect for the Twin Towers was a Michigan architect, and also did some buildings, the motif, that kind of like arc motif that he had down on the first floor of the Twin Towers was actually used in the education building at my alma mater at Wayne State University. So there's that connection, but I happen to have met 3 times Daniel Lipskin. He's the master architect for Ground Zero, all right? He also he was from New York, all right? He was born in Poland. His parents just survived the Holocaust. They end up in New York, and then he becomes an architect. And then he travels around the world and ends up in Michigan doing teaching the grad students at Cranbrook Institute. And he wrote a book, and then I actually was at the book signing. And he told me that he never met anyone during a book signing that asked what I asked for. And that was that he's famous for this reflective shadow. The way the buildings were supposed to be designed in the original plan is that during the time of the first hit to the last fall of the Twin Towers, there was this shadow of time that was supposed to reflect down into Ground Zero, and it was supposed to be kind of dark, right? Well, he had the original sketch of that in the center of the book, and I asked him to actually autograph that picture in the book, and then later I ended up meeting him at the Guggenheim. Later, so I was living in Michigan when he signed the book, and then years later I accidentally bumped into him and his wife at the Guggenheim after moving to New York. But there's what is interesting to me about the Twin Towers and the Freedom Tower. In a sense, it's like the Phoenix Rising. All right. And in another sense, the Freedom Tower was already there when the Twin Towers were built, but it was the negative space in between the towers. You had the towers, and then you have this negative space in center.
Okay,
and
so
that's a hint. There was a hint there that was going to be the birth of the Freedom Tower. So but you had to have that. You had to have that duality. You had to have that duality, that charge, the negative and charge. You had the South Tower, the North Tower, right? That's what they were called, the North and South Tower, Tower 1, Tower 2, right? So there was this charge, there was this polarization, and through that energy, through that chaotic event of 9/11, emerges that negative space, right? That eventually becomes the Freedom Tower. So, that's when I see, the old pictures and the new ones, that's what I think about it. And plus it's a big middle finger to the Middle East, so, with the spire in the center. But it was amazing to see it rising and being a part of it and seeing that on a daily basis, to be able to literally see the construction happening. I'm so glad that I moved down to New York when they were building that, when they were just starting to build that building. I saw the whole thing, laying the foundation and putting the superstructure up, the whole thing.
The foundation of the whole of New York City was laid down by Freemasons, and every single building and the whole area has been designed to symbolically reflect what is in some ways above, below, a little bit like Washington, D.C. And of course, like you said, they pointed out now, there was a reflection already of the future Freedom Tower in the Twin Towers, almost like they were pre-programmed to end up that way, and there was definitely a lot of oddities regarding this sudden collapse of the Twin Towers after these airplanes hit the Twin Towers. There has been, of course, a never-ending series of conspiracy theories today. We don't want to go in there because we will lose ourselves in a never-ending. But and there is those who said that the planes were not even real; they were virtual. They were thrown in by holograms, and then. But there was some kind of oddities regarding the fact that two Twin Towers like that come falling down suddenly, like a controlled demolition.
Well, it was the thermite, the nanothermite, which is an explosive. And when you look at this thing was free falling. I used to be a structural engineer in automotive. All right. So I know about steel. All right. And crushing. In high impact events. All right. Steel would do that. It would, even if you had a floor failure, what would happen is it would slow down and wait until enough pressure would build up and then come back down. So the building would not have fallen in free fall. Free fall means nothing is inhibiting it from hitting the ground. It's moving at 9.81 meters per second squared. All right. Or roughly, that's my physics, if I remember right. But, that's the speed of gravity. All right. That's the, or the acceleration of gravity. So when this would have just broken down slowly and build up pressure if you were going to have structural failure. And then at the very bottom, it would have been the least compromised, and therefore the crushing of the building would be slower over time. And eventually there should have been at least a quarter to a third of the building still standing. That's not what happened. But when you see these blowouts, there was this nanothermite cutting through those I-beams. those I-beams are really thick. All right. And they have them in the museum, some of the I-beams. It is very hard to understand how a plane could cut through those I-beams so easily, even at 400 or 500 miles per hour, because it's aluminum. It's an aluminum fuselage.
They always justify the whole thing by saying the planes were full of fuel, and so the fuel went down and it created that.
Yeah, but you don't have instantaneous. Liquefaction of steel. That doesn't happen unless you're like right by the sun. I mean,
there's something else happened that I would like to discuss with you. 6 years ago, Pope Francis went to Ground Zero and celebrated a interreligious encounter at the Ground Zero Memorial. I have always found that moment very odd. I think that, I don't know if you have seen it, if you remember the various religious representatives present there, but it seemed to me that it was almost like the ground zero of the one world religion that was coming together. And so when we saw this downtown Manhattan suddenly in an American moment of religiosity that can be seen, of course, in cities like Rome or even Mecca or wherever. But to actually see the 9/11 Memorial Museum then with this prayer by Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, it seemed to me that there was something to do with this one world religion that is kind of coming together in the end times. What's your take on that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't notice that during the actual, the event with the Pope, but after the master plan actually was built and you could walk around and really reflect on what was built. I'm telling you, there is a lot of deep symbolism that's going back to Egyptian kind of stuff, and I'll tell you, there's something deep going on with that place. Now, do you think it was very similar? Did you get the same feeling with watching that with Ground Zero and, let's say, the opening of the tunnel between England and Europe?
Or even that
or CERN,
that weird ceremony with the tunnel that was in Switzerland a few years back. There was like some weird ceremony that really showed this demonic side. They seem to be always emerged very much in symbolism when they do these events. A little bit like when they do the Olympics, they like to throw in symbolism right at the opening of the event. But definitely Pope Francis's Ground Zero was very symbolic also because the next thing that happened 3 years later was that he went to Abu Dhabi and signed this human fraternity document, which is now at the basis of this unifying project which is putting together that then came out with this encyclica Fratelli Tutti in the middle of the pandemic. Instead of focusing on the crisis of the pandemic, the Pope, who is, by the way, the biggest sustainer of the vaccines, who has been taking money from Pfizer and all the others that are involved in these vaccinations, he was thinking about this Fratelli Tutti, all brothers, which is very Masonic concept. And so I think that then we had, of course, the Rothschild family visiting the Pope, as well as last year, as well as the year before, 2019, we had Bill and Melinda Gates and the Gates Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, all involved in this conference in November 2019, right at the start of what They were like at the new ground zero, which some call the Wuhan lab, the new ground zero. What do you think about that term, using the Wuhan lab as the new ground zero?
Well, I mean, ground zero, when someone uses the term, means that a disaster happened, you know, and it really is nuclear. It's based on a nuclear term, where ground zero is that point where the bomb went off, right? And then the radiation and destruction emanates out from that point.
In a way, with all these people that have died around the world, we can say that has definitely done more damage than a nuclear bomb.
Well, you know, yeah, definitely. I mean, and this goes right in line with maybe it was planned, because there's individuals that have written books about this, about this depopulation agenda, because the CIA has white papers that they were more concerned about population growth in undesirable constituencies. All right, to say it nicely, and that they viewed it as more of an existential threat to the United States than a nuclear weapon. So there was, this push to, like, how do you slow down the growth rate in some countries? So this might fall in line with one of the tools in the toolbox for them to do this. I do feel that P4, the Wuhan facility, the Wuhan crisis, is part of a larger arc of history for the United States, maybe for the world, but and it goes, and it's tied to the hip with 9/11. I call it the canonical event. I mean, there is no accident that event 201 is the mirror image of 102. 102 is the number of minutes that it took for the buildings to fall down. All right. So, and there was a famous book called 102 Minutes by either a New York Times writer or an architect. I can't remember the author. But so there's that hint, event 201, and so there's this mirror image, and I see this as a canonical event, like a bookend. A bookend is on the left is a mirror of the right to hold the books together, and what's in between is an event, a canonical event. It's written down, and it's an event, right? So we're living through that canonical event of 9/11, and through this COVID-19 crisis, and they're tied together. They're tied to the hip.
A few minutes ago, the UN chief has delivered the following message. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued a dire warning that the world is moving in the wrong direction and faces a pivotal moment where continuing business as usual could lead to a breakdown of global order and a future of perpetual crisis. Changing course could signal a breakthrough to a greener and safer future, he said. Wow, man, we are getting ready. I think that the UN is kind of announcing the great New Deal's reset. Let's mix it all together. Great reset, one world religion, new world order, deep state, everything. It's all coming together, and the UN is actually announced it. Is saying, Guterres said, the paralysis extends far beyond COVID-19 to the failures to tackle the climate crisis and our suicidal war on nature and the collapse of biodiversity, the unchecked inequality undermining the cohesion of societies, and technology advances without guardrail to protect us from its unforeseen consequences. So the head of the UN sounds really like...
well, I'll tell you what, there's, you have social engineers, right. You have social engineers and you have real engineers, the ones that know how to design stuff, how to make stuff, right? The social engineers are seeing that there is a crisis happening. Now, in terms of, let's say, global warming, that's their perspective. I don't think it's a crisis, but let's say that they think it's a crisis. Their answer is that you have to curtail your economic development and you have to change your energy consumption patterns and your portfolio for your countries. because they assume that your activity is what's causing the global warming. It's probably solar related and not our own activity. But with that said, they don't use the tools in the toolbox. The tools in the toolbox isn't curtail my freedoms and have one world government, one world religion. The tools in the toolbox are actually have the engineers out there designing systems that will adapt to a changing environment. You know, we can engineer our way out of this using real engineering, and that's social engineering, where social engineering wants to curtail the Constitution and hurt our economy.
To me, that the UN was definitely curtail the Constitution and actually work as they have always been as the basis, the nucleus for this new world order, no? For this one world government. I mean, the United
nucleus. This is a good point that you're making. The nucleus of the one world government needs to kill off its enemy. All right, its arch enemy. Its arch enemy is capitalism. Because with capitalism, there's an incentive to find a way. It's just like nature, but they don't want nature. They say they want nature, but they don't. They want to kill off nature. Capitalism is as nature-esque as it gets, because it's about the fittest. It's about that chaoticness, unplanned, but through incentive, there is that desire to find a solution if there is a problem. So I believe in the capitalistic spirit, and that's what this country is all about. They want to kill that, and they want to kill the family unit. Like, for example, in medical school, this week, I had a lecture on Friday on how to handle certain types of patients that are, let's say, just not normal, transgender, very woke-ish and all this.
Don't tell me you had a woke class. You had a woke class.
Yeah. And the thing is that, this is where the world is going, where you got to ask for the proper pronoun. You have to, accept, a behavior that is unbecoming and destructive for the family unit. And this is what is being promoted by the UN and these medical institutions, these schools and medical schools, they're buying into One Health, which is a UN propaganda piece. We are destroying that very fundamental element of society, and that's the family. When you destroy that, then everything starts to break apart. The religion starts to break apart. The nationality starts to break apart. The economics starts to break apart. And then it's easy to conquer. It's divide and conquer, right? Achilles heel, our society's Achilles heel is the family unit.
For the Chinese, it must be very easy to conquer a country that is divided like the US now more than ever. And for the Taliban to raise their flag at the presidential palace today on the 9/11 anniversary is symbolic. And
if I was the president of the United States, and maybe one day I will be, but if I was the president of the United States, I would have had SEAL Team 6. All right. Do an operation, you take down that damn flag, and you put up an American flag and you film it just like it was Okinawa.
But unfortunately, let's talk about the SEAL 6.
Bullshit.
But let's talk about SEAL 6. They died in mysterious circumstances a few months after their operation, and really, we never recovered the black box of SEAL 6 and that last operation that cost them their lives in Afghanistan. So I mean. There was, after the killing of Osama bin Laden, there was, of course, they were on the super black list of all these terrorists, and suddenly they all die in very, very mysterious circumstances. So, I mean, it seems like America has some really screwed up allies that manage to do things, or I mean, they are basically in bed with the devil. Let's say that's pretty clear, because if you are letting your own soldiers die, like we have seen also in with what happened at the Kabul airport, or if you are letting Americans trapped behind enemy lines, of course now they are releasing them because the Taliban wants to unblock a lot of money that they have blocked by the International Money Fund and whatnot. But I mean, apart from that, we are in bed with the enemy. And we should hunt down the traitors, but the traitors are all around us, and they even have a political party here that, for example, in California, has managed in the last week to show that a gorilla can throw an egg to Larry Elder and get away with an act of racism.
Right. Exactly. If that happened on the other shoe, it would be all over the news about racism and how dare someone throw an egg at a black man running.
Even in Bangladesh, like Larry Elder said. But I mean, I feel sorry for Larry Elder, and I feel sorry for California, which is basically entrapped in this democratic scenario. I hope that something changes in 3 days. I really hope, because it will send a strong signal. We always discuss, of course, all the events of the week. This week, one of the main events was definitely Larry Elder visit at Venice Beach that ended up like it ended up, but also the fact that the Governor Gavin Newsom didn't say one word about his the guy who is running. In a democratic society, you will say something. You will say, "Oh, I'm very sorry for Larry. This shouldn't be the way to act, throwing eggs at a black man with a mask, with a gorilla mask. This should be, you have a gentleman way of doing things." No, Gavin Newsom is a white supremacist. He's the face of the KKK, and that is the truth here. And we are doing nothing to stop these people. And Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and all these idiots who are sustaining Governor Newsom, I hope they wake up on the 15th of September with California finally back on track. Because people are living in their thousands, California. Now, I have a very good friend the other day went out to have a dinner in LA. And suddenly the owner of the restaurant, in fact, he said, "Please leave the restaurant if you can now." They thought, okay, maybe they want to just, close down the restaurant because they have had their day, they want to close it down. No, after half an hour, it was a warning that had a reasoning. After half an hour, it was like the Walking Dead started to crawl around the restaurant, and that area, that fancy area of LA, suddenly was like some scene from the Omega Man. So it's like we are facing.
Well, what we need to do is do like what they did in The Walking Dead, and just walk around and just start shooting them. I mean, I'll tell you, you're right. What's happening is it's the dawn of the dead. It's the dawn of the dead now.
Yeah, but here in California, you are not even allowed a gun. And if you're allowed a gun, you have all sorts of restrictions, and they're making it more and more difficult because, of course, the only ones who can have guns in their libtard world are their bodyguards and their mercenaries, who of course, they use, and they have no problem, and even we have seen it a month ago with that woman going on TV, that black congresswoman saying, I deserve to have my private security, and I spend thousands of dollars on it, but you have to reduce the police. So
right. You're talking about the Chicago mayor, right?
No, that was another congresswoman. We're actually in Congress. Okay. No, Chicago Mayor Lightfoot, she's just from another planet. I don't know. I mean, Chicago, unfortunately, is descending more and more. And there is more people that die in Chicago than in Afghanistan these days. Let's be honest.
And it's and a lot of it is black on black crime. But one of my favorite pictures, scenes during the crazy events that were going on last summer with the Proud Boys and Antifa was you had this guy He had like a motorcycle helmet on, and he had an American flag, tied as like a cape, and he had a garbage can lid, as like a shield, like it was like Captain America. I'll tell you, that's where we need to go. That's where this is all going to come to a head, and we're either going to save the Constitution or we're going to lose the Constitution. We need to be on the streets, fighting, pushing this back, just like Captain America. Yeah. Even if they say, okay, you can't have guns or whatever, well, we can have bow and arrows, we can have swords, we can go medieval.
Listen. Just so you know, in Italy this week, a group called the Warriors that was supposed to intervene today in protest was arrested, and they were arrested because they had katana swords and all kinds of things that were not really guns, but they said this is dangerous. They might do some actions. I don't know what you can do with a samurai sword. Maybe they can go around like Highlander. But in any case, they were all arrested. So I mean, they will not stop at your gun. They will start with the guns, and then in the end, you will be screened for your kitchen knife. And then you will have to say.
They'll take away your keyboard too. They'll take away your keyboard. Yeah, because it's they'll take away your weapons of all kinds.
And on top
and
of
your
that,
keyboard.
In Australia, they will say you can only have 6 beers in your fridge this week. That was one bottle of wine maximum, 375 milliliters of pure alcohol spirit. So if you have 3 bottles of wine like I have, you are basically you could be arrested in Australia. I mean, this is insane. I mean, these people have completely lost the plot. And I saw though that the countries that seem to be really going more Orwellian and more libtarded are the Commonwealth countries: New Zealand, Canada, Australia. They all depend from the Queen. They all depend from the Crown. They never fought 1776. And 2 days ago, we have seen, though, people throwing stones at Justin Trudeau in Canada. People are angry. People are really angry. And I don't think that in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks now, the Canadian elections will go in the favor of Justin Trudeau. And we only need Larry Elder to win here and Justin Trudeau to go out of the way in Canada. And we have already took. And then we need, of course, to maintain Bolsonaro in Brazil, which is under attack by Lula and the Jesuits who are promoting him, because Lula is a good friend of the Pope. He was arrested, he's a communist and all that. And aside from that, I went to Mexico this week for my problem. I got a couple of boxes of ivermectin. So I'm actually gonna pick them up for you. I want to show you the box so you can advise me how I should get. I should get it here. Just a second before. Now there has been a lot of talk on ivermectin this week, as we all know. So this is for human consumption. I tend to say to my listeners, also in my past show this week, be very careful, because of course, if you take ivermectin for a horse, it will be a dosage for a horse, and you will probably get very sick. But there was also a scandal because Rolling Stone had falsely reported that there was a lot of poisonings in a hospital that was not, that actually they had to release a disclaimer later, because it wasn't true. Joe Rogan, 1 week after he used ivermectin, the gentleman was tested negative. What do you think of this drug?
Well, it's a deworm. I mean, right? It's typically for parasites in deworming of livestock. That was how it was invented. But the thing is that they have found out that some of these types of compounds, like ivermectin, have antiviral capability. And when coupled with other things, will be able to help with the infection of SARS-CoV-2. Now, what Joe Rogan did was he was given Regeneron. He was given the monoclonal antibody when he had it. He had the ivermectin. He was taking zinc. And I don't know if he was on remdesivir also or not. No, but it was a cocktail of things that he was on. It wasn't just the ivermectin.
Because he had some vitamins, some integrated.
Yeah, right. D3. Oh, that's right. He had He had very high doses of intravenous vitamin C. So, but the idea is that if you couple it in kind of a cocktail, very similar like HIV, and you're attacking it from different ways, you are boxing in the infection and you're clearing it out quicker. So to say that just ivermectin, if someone gets SARS-CoV-2, I don't think that would be prudent. I think it's synergistic with other things.
First of all,
but the thing is,
listen, Paul, there is 4 pills here. I notice one thing, first of all. There is no, we call it in Italy, bugiardino, which is usually the illustrative paper that you get when you have a medicine. There is no illustrative. There is only the things written on the outside. Valiant is the company. There is 4 pills. But how, if I got sick, how should I take these pills? Because that's
I can't tell you. I can't tell you legally.
I
can't tell you. I can't tell you on this show. I cannot tell you on this show. I can't tell you on this show.
Okay.
But the thing, right? But the thing is that there is literature. What I can do is say this: there is literature out there that suggests that ivermectin, when coupled with other things, when someone has SARS-CoV-2, can clear the infection. Now, there are MDs that have stated that they have used it prophylactically. I know for a fact that the university, Columbia University, back in the first wave in New York, in the pathology lab, they used prophylactically hydroxychloroquine, to prevent the infection, because they were processing so many samples that were SARS-CoV-2 related. So they were afraid that they were going to contract it. So that whole staff in the pathology department was prophylactically taking hydroxychloroquine. Now, and it worked. So, that's what I can say, in public. And the research is suggesting that it does work. Here's the problem: is that there's a lot of people out there that are self-medicating, and when you're self-medicating, it increases the probability of overdose and cause potential side effects.
Sure, and also what I said: if you take the dose of a horse, if you take the horse version, the veterinary version, which is much higher in it's not for a human, so of course it's much higher the quantity, then you can get really sick, because instead of taking maybe 6 milligram for a tablet, you take 600 milligrams, or I don't know exactly what.
Right. But it's also related to the patient's history and their other ailments or allergic reactions. It's not a cookie cutter thing, but there is a range of potential.
One thing is for sure that ivermectin for human beings has sold out here in the US. So people now have to go in Mexico to find it. So
well, you're right, and that's another thing is just making sure that you get good quality compounds versus let's say black market compounds.
Of course, you buy it, like I, for example, bought it in a legal way in a pharmacy, which I know in Tijuana, and that was, of course, I had to give my passport and all that, so it was done in a proper way. So thank you very much for clearing that. We are, of course, transmitting me from Palm Springs, California, Dr. Paul Cottrell from New York City. Today, in remembrance of 9/11, so we're going through a lot of information. Of course, we have been discussing mainly the tragedy of 9/11, but we have also discussed the follow-up to that tragedy, which led to the Patriot Act, and now all the restrictions that go with it, which is, of course, instead the ones that have followed, unfortunately, the start of this pandemic, which I think we don't see any ending for it. I mean, it seems like now, even in the mainstream news, the scientific establishment is not ready any longer to give you an end date. They kind of say we might have to coexist for a very, very long time, even hinting on an infinite. I think that if that's true, we should once again discover where it comes from and how. We know where it comes from, which is a lot, but we need to have the ultimate confirmation. And then at that point, China should in some way pay for what they have done, which they will never do. So at that point, what should we do? Can we declare war? No, because they have already bought all our politicians. They see that America is weak. They're actually doing everything to sabotage us. We have people like Eric Swalwell still sitting in some kind of intercommittee. We have still Feinstein, whatever her name, who has a driver who is a Chinese spy himself, or many. And then we have Hunter Biden, who of course is friends with the chief of intelligence in China. And he actually said that loud and clear, but nothing happens here. It seems like we are on a very, very dark path here, Paul. We don't see any hope.
Right. You know, and I've done some shows with you, and I just did a show with Mike Adams, talking about when they go through multiple boosters, how that's going to weaken our immune system. The IgGs, you know, the immunoglobulin Gs and the immunoglobulin Ms will start to go down. And our reaction to the boosters will dissipate. And so our titer levels will come down even farther. And then we're hardwired to the original epitope, the P4 epitope. You know, because of that, we are potentially creating an even worse crisis in 5 to 6 years if a new variant pops up, what I call V12. And it totally flies underneath the radar of the immune system. And instead, right now, Delta and Mu have partial neutralization by antibodies, either through natural infection or through the vaccine. So there is a crisis that's going to ramp up if we continue on just doing boosters of the same epitope and having a cookie cutter approach around the world about the vaccine. It's a huge problem.
Yeah, but there is also signals of rebellion. For example, today a police union announced they are rebelling against this vaccine mandate. Today, a New York hospital is opposing baby deliveries after too many staffers in maternity units quit over vaccine mandate. I mean, we are seeing.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And this is why it was so important to prevent the Biopatriot Act. And part of preventing the Biopatriot Act is actually going kinetic. And what that means is being active and basically telling the government no. And if you cross the line, and that's why I called one of my original shows the Red Line War Room. If you cross the line, then there's going to be a conflict, a military conflict between the citizens and the government. This is kind of like the new Civil War. And it's not going to be about slavery and states' rights. It's going to be about my body, my choice, and the technocracy that the federal government wants to promote. That will be the new Civil War. That's the only way this is going to stop. You know, here, you know, we are approaching 2 years into this crisis with no signs of this abating in terms of getting our civil liberties back, in terms of getting rid of that mask, and in terms of going through our daily lives without being jabbed. When this continues beyond 2 years, there's going to be stress in the society and a lot of moms out there that are going to say no, and there's going to be a flare up against the government. And I think that what happened during January 6th is going to be a firecracker. I hope that's what happens, because the only way that the Fauci's gang, the only way that the Fauci gang stops, and the erosion of our civil liberties, is if we as citizens take a stand. We need to be Captain America with a garbage can lid, and with an American flag, and with a bat.
The other day, I was just simply going through, like you go through YouTube and watch different things. At one point, they put the publicity, because they have their own publicity that, then you have, for example, the publicity of the ad of Gavin Newsom, don't do the recall and all this kind. But then at one point, there was an ad that really grabbed my attention. They made an award-style, soon to be probably award-winning documentary on Dr. Fauci, and he was described as some kind of god. And this documentary will probably be released soon in all the cinemas, I don't know what, or one of the streaming services. But it was presented really in a Hollywood manner, and you see Dr. Fauci when he was a little baby, and then growing up, and then he saw the dangers, and then he was already threatened back in the days of HIV/AIDS, and then he's threatened again now, but he's doing it for our own good, and he's a great hero, and all this BS. While instead, President Trump revealed that Dr. Fauci never told him that he was founding a virology lab in Wuhan. And as you know, this week, 900-page documents came out proving that he did gain of function research.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there is a part of the society, Paul, that even if you bring if you bring all of these libtards in front of the truth, they will turn the other way. They're so brainwashed that their God is Dr. Fauci.
It's, you have the libtards, and you also have the medical personnel that has fallen into a certain dogma. There's some medical personnel out there that are in line with what we're saying, but there is a big section of the medical community that is still believing that this was natural, and they're not paying attention to the potential problems that their treatment that they're prescribing. Like the erosion of our immune system using the same epitope and constant boosters. I was just in a seminar yesterday, and it was talking about 2 ER doctors treating COVID. All right, since the crisis. So these were doctors from the very beginning, and the individuals that were treating were in actually Georgia. All right, so in 2 different Georgian hospitals, and they were trying to explain what they were seeing, and they were saying that the Delta for them in their municipality is as bad, if not worse, than the original wave that they had. All right. And they kept on pushing, of course, because they're doctors, they keep on pushing, you know what, we need to have a mandatory vaccine program. They don't talk about the autonomy of the patient. They're not talking about the potentiality of the IgMs and the IgGs with overboosting diminishing. And they're not talking about hardwiring our epitope to P4 and through the Hoskins effect. All right. These are medical concepts that they should be looking into, but they're pushing an agenda. See, so there's the libtard. My point is that there's a libtard thing that they don't even have any medical background. And then there is this medical establishment that is just believing in a certain dogma, and they think that Fauci and the CDC, if they say it, it must be gospel. And there's not enough people that are really questioning.
Here is the gospel for you. Here's the gospel. Official trailer of the National Geographic movie on Dr. Fauci.
God help us.
When I think about my dad growing up, I certainly think about that seriousness and wanting to do the right thing. At the same time, very few people get to see. He's funny, weird, and really playful.
You can't take everything seriously because then you'll start thinking that you're something that you're not. I loved clinical medicine. The idea of discovery and having an impact on people. That's what really captured me. I grew up in a somewhat tough neighborhood in Brooklyn. The culture is that you didn't get intimidated by a lot of things. When someone attacks, I don't immediately fight back. It's nothing personal, it's strictly business. In 1981, the HIV/AIDS was evolving rapidly and frighteningly. There was anger at the response.
We accused Tony of causing those deaths.
Finally, I put myself into their shoes. That's when I started to really reach out.
It was pretty much the first and only time I think anybody in government came to us.
That changed everything.
When you got sick, you were gone fast.
It was so frustrating when you're used to fixing things and you're just not really fixing anything.
It's affecting you now.
Yeah.
Why?
Post-traumatic stress syndrome.
He's crying, eh?
When COVID hit, he became this target.
My dad said, we're going to get through this whole thing. And he's held that.
We're seeing upticks again, and nobody's hearing from you.
I don't understand the hate that people have.
These people are really, really getting bad. I mean, they're harassing my daughters constantly, which bothers me more than anything else.
We heard about what he went through in the HIV/AIDS pandemic, like seeing signs, Fauci's a murderer. And I remember asking him, like, is this actually what it was like? His response was, you can't even compare the two. This is so beyond the beyond.
Fauci says, here are the facts, and here's my recommendation for a way forward.
He becomes the size of the challenge he faces each time.
If you're a public servant, you don't do it because you want to make money. You don't do it for the glory. You do it because you care.
When you're involved in a race to stop a horrible disease, you always feel you're not doing things quickly enough.
Fauci in theaters from September 10. So that's it. I mean, it's like, then you have at the end, of course, George W. Bush, which, by the way, just said comparing the terrorists with the ones from Capitol Hill on the 6th of January, just so we know who George W. Bush really is. And then you have, of course, Bono, who used to hang out where? In Bohemian Grove. And he concludes the trailer for Fauci. So, I mean, it's like 360 degrees, 9/11, 20 years.
And you too, Bono from U2. One of their concerts were called 360 Tour.
That's it.
But,
I mean, so we really have completed today, I think, an unprecedented study over these 20 years. And so I think that we should listen maybe what George W. Bush has said regarding the comparing the January 6th domestic terrorists to the Islamic terrorists, because as things have changed in 20 years, and so from the terrorists being in some cave on the other side of the world, now the terrorists are basically your next door neighbor. Here we are.
Security measures incorporated into our lives are both sources of comfort and reminders of our vulnerability. And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them.
Wow.
The security measures incorporated into our lives.
Wow. I mean, this we should listen again and again and again. because this is George W. Bush that 20 years ago was the guy standing next to the firefighter saying, I hear you, I hear your pain. And then now he's comparing the patriots of the United States of America, some of them stupid enough to go inside the Capitol Hill on the 6th of January, to the terrorists that did 9/11. I think that is very despicable. I think that that really says a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is the problem, is that the patriots that are trying to protect the Constitution and our civil liberties are being framed as terrorists now. And it's under that whole apparatus that emerged right out of 9/11 through the Patriot Act. And it's being sharpened, and it's being expanded through this crisis. And that's what I call the Bio-Patriot Act, where you're going to have forced vaccines, you're going to have, tracking, surveillance, you're going to have digital wallets, you're going to have vaccine passports, you're going to have curtailment of movement to different facilities if you don't have the vaccine or the vaccine passport. We are losing our freedoms. If we want to save our Constitution, we have to water the tree of liberty with blood. And this is why I keep on saying that Thomas Jefferson was right. When the government becomes tyrannical, it is the obligation and the responsibility of the citizenry to fight it and kill it. Tyranny in all forms, including if it's the government, needs to be abolished. That is the only way out of this. I stated this on, and people didn't believe me. I stated this on March of 2020. I said that the only way you're going to get out of this crisis where you're not going to lose your civil liberties is if you push back and force a pre-9/11 day and truncate these agencies. And that means going kinetic. So in a nutshell, if we as citizens don't fight, if we're not willing to fight for our constitutional freedoms, we will lose them, period. You can't get Congress to act because they're bought and paid for. They're part of the apparatus. You can't change it, but you can fight the apparatus. You can hit the apparatus. There are Achilles heels to the apparatus, but it's when citizens are willing to die for a cause, willing to go the distance to save constitutional freedoms for our children and our children's children, then we will have a way out of this crisis. But to accept the idea that Fauci is God and that we're going to have some sort of a medical technocracy, that is unacceptable to me, because medical technocracy led to the Nazis, that led to the killing of my grandmother's mother. She died in the Holocaust and her brother died in the Holocaust. All right. That's where this is going. Now, are we going to fight and prevent the Warsaw Ghetto, or are we going to just let it happen and we're going to die at Walmart? It's up to us.
I mean, the brother of my grandmother died in the fight. He was in the Royal Air Force with the Nazis and during the Second World War. And so I completely understand what you mean. You have to fight. And these are the modern Nazis, definitely. More like Kamala Harris, that today, in the Remembrance Day at the 9/11 Memorial in Shanklin, Pennsylvania, listen to what she said. I mean, incredible what this woman can say. I mean, she's completely out of it. Let's see.
On the days that followed, September 11th, 2001, we were all reminded that unity is possible in America. We were reminded also that unity is imperative in America. It is essential to our shared prosperity, to our national security, and to our standing in the world. And by unity, I don't mean uniformity. We had differences of opinion in 2001, as we do in 2021. And I believe that in America, our diversity is our strength. At the same time, we saw after 9/11 how fear can be used to sow division in our nation. As Sikh and Muslim Americans were targeted because of how they looked or how they worshiped. But we also saw what happens when so many Americans, in the spirit of our nation, stand in solidarity with all people and their fellow American, with those who experience violence and discrimination. When we stand together.
So the Muslims were targeted for the way they looked. Ooh, for the way they looked. It seems to me like if we let the Muslim take over our society, we're going to be ending up with Sharia law. I mean, it's like areas of Sweden that 20 years ago, when I used to live in Norway, areas I suddenly start seeing the Sharia imposed. Even in Oslo, in Norway, or in Sweden, now there is areas where you can't even go, where there is the Sharia imposed, and the same is happening in Great Britain. So wherever you let the Muslim loose, they take over and they reject the Western civilization.
I'll tell you, you're 100% right. It's about a caliphate. It's about a caliphate. And that basically means that they're going to come in, infiltrate, and then push out Western civilization. It's a battle of civilizations. That's what's really happening. And if she's too stupid to understand history, then she should step down. But you know, the thing is that to your point,
I don't
there's
think
a place.
She's too stupid to understand anything. I mean, she's like really, I don't know. She's been there by miracle.
To your point, though, there's a place called Hamtramck. There used to be like a music scene in Detroit. Hamtramck was like a small enclave within Detroit. All right. I don't know if you've ever been there, Leo, but I mean, there was kind of a music scene.
I actually was the first one who brought techno DJs from Detroit to Europe back in.
Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about, right? So you know what I'm talking about. So Hamtramck, you know, had a lot of bar scenes and all that, but Hamtramck was a Polish community, all right, for decades, all right. Then all of a sudden, right after 9/11 and the whole Dearborn was starting to really blossom with more Muslims, Hamtramck, Polish community moved out, the Muslim community moved in, and now you have the call to whatever they call it in the morning, prayers and all that, you know, whatever, I don't know the name of it, but they have that tower they put up, and then they do the the call for prayer for five times a day now, you know. And it used to be a Polish. We're going to have something very similar in New York. It's not going to be Chinatown anymore. It's going to be Islam town.
In Rome, which is the city of the Pope, you have the Muslims publicly doing the call of prayer in front of the Colosseum, or in the main squares, even in Milan, in front of the Duomo. So even the places which are characteristic of Christianity is connected to the Colosseum because a lot of Christians were sacrificed in the Colosseum, and so the Pope every year used to go because since the beginning of the pandemic he doesn't even go to the Colosseum. Instead, in the Colosseum last year, well, at the beginning of in October 2019, strange enough, they bought a statue of Moloch that stayed there all the way till Easter of 2020, the statue of Moloch. I mean, that's quite symbolic, but you know what Moloch symbolizes. So I guess that you have it even in the Old Testament. So I don't need to tell you what Moloch is. And the fact that these people are satanic. They are satanic, and I don't care what they say. The actual, the Abrahamic faiths, of course, are called Abrahamic faiths because even the Muslim say they come from Abraham. But there is a lot of questions regarding the call to God that Mohammed had in that cave. We might discuss this in a further episode. Today we are nearly at the end, 4 minutes to the end of this show. So I will wrap it up also with reminding everybody to support our shows. You can donate, make donations to both me, through PayPal, Fundly, or also Paul Cottrell. You can also find our products on leozagami.com. All our books are linked. All the products of Paul Cottrell are also on Studio Reykjavik, which is his website. Something else you want to add in this very special day, Paul?
Well, I just want to say to the first responders in 9/11, you know, that you're not forgotten, that the NYPD lost a lot. The FDNY lost a lot of personnel, and that as a New Yorker, we need to remember and never forget. And that includes not deleting videos about 9/11 and talking about 9/11. And that includes making sure that we do not forget the lessons of the loss of our constitutional freedoms because of 9/11. And we need to take that lesson and extrapolate that to this crisis, to remember 9/11 in its proper form. We need to hunt down, prosecute in an elite in a court of law. You know, and if found guilty, we need to execute the ones that have perpetrated this current crisis, because it's tied to 9/11. It's a canonical event.
Well, I mean,
and we should never forget. We should never forget what happened to our country. And the traitors, according to George Washington, traitors get hung. Traitors get hung.
It seems like now it's actually George W. Bush who is reversing history and making out of the patriots the real problem and the traitors, while he instead stands there proclaiming instead to be the moral authority. What about the Pakistani military intelligence that was with him on the 11th of September 2001? What about Osama bin Laden being killed in Pakistan, not Afghanistan? What about Pakistan helping in the last couple of weeks the Taliban to both take Panjshir and establish their government? Today, they created their government, they brought up their flag, and they did it on the 11th of September. It's symbolic, and we here are instead still giving credit to people like George W. Bush. When I see the Republicans, even Trump Republicans, giving, because that's the way we are branded these days, giving credit to George W. Bush or the Bush family, I would like to remind them that this guy and his family are a bunch of criminals, that the Republican Party was no better than the Democratic Party until Donald J. Trump took it over and transformed it forever. And people need to remember that, especially today. Especially today, 20 years later.
And the Bush family is closer to Nazism than let's just say the American ideal.
Thank you very much, Paul Cottrell. We will, of course, talk also next week, and I always enjoy our weekly conversations.
Thank you. Let me stop the recording here.
Recording stop.